At my grandson's 18th birthday party, he looked at my simple cardigan and worn jeans like I was a stain on his designer celebration. "Grandma Ruth," he said loud enough for his friends to hear, "you dress like a homeless person. Can't you try to look normal for once?" I smiled, nodded, and quietly walked to the kitchen. But when Monday morning came, his bank account showed $0, and suddenly my homeless appearance was the least of his problems. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Ruth Elizabeth Morrison, and at 73, I've learned that the most expensive lessons in life often come disguised as the cheapest insults. Most people see me as just another elderly woman, shuffling through the grocery store in my faded cardigans and sensible shoes, clutching coupons and taking my time at the checkout. They see the gray hair pulled back in a simple bun, the reading glasses hanging from a chain around my neck, the sturdy walking shoes that prioritize comfort over style. What they don't see is the woman who spent 45 years building a financial empire from a single savings account and a stubborn refusal to accept limitations. I live in Millfield, Connecticut, in the same modest two-story house I bought in 1978 when it was just a starter home in a working-class neighborhood. Back then, it had brown shag carpet, avocado appliances, and a mortgage that kept me awake at night. Today, that same neighborhood has been discovered by young professionals who pay 3 times what I did for houses half the size of mine. My property value has increased by over 800%, but I still drive the same 2010 Honda Civic I bought used, still shop with coupons, still darn my own socks when they get holes. People assume I do these things because I have to. They're wrong. I do them because I choose to. Because I learned long ago that the difference between wealthy and rich is knowing when you have enough. Wealthy people understand that money is a tool, not a trophy. Rich people spend money to look successful. Wealthy people spend money to remain free. My grandson, Tyler James Morrison Clark, he insisted on hyphenating his last name when his parents divorced, claiming it sounded more sophisticated, had never learned this distinction. At 18, he possessed the confidence that comes from never having wanted for anything, and the arrogance that develops when you mistake privilege for personal achievement. He was tall, athletically built, with the kind of sharp jawline and perfect teeth that come from excellent genetics and expensive orthodontics. His hair was always styled with products that cost more than most people spend on groceries, and his wardrobe consisted entirely of brands that required waiting lists and connections to purchase. Tyler lived with his mother, my daughter-in-law Sarah, in a glass and steel contemporary home in the prestigious Riverside Heights development. The house had cost $2.8 million and featured a 3-car garage, a wine cellar, and a kitchen that appeared in home design magazines. Tyler's bedroom was larger than most studio apartments, complete with a wall-mounted television, a gaming setup that could run a small business, and a walk-in closet organized with the precision of a luxury boutique. His allowance was $2,500 per month, not including the additional funds for school activities, car maintenance, and what Sarah diplomatically called, quote, social expenses. This money appeared in his account every first of the month, with the reliability of Sunrise, funding a lifestyle that included designer clothes, expensive dinners with friends, weekend trips to New York City, and a social calendar that required constant financial maintenance. Tyler had never questioned where this money came from. As far as he knew, it simply existed, like gravity or Wi-Fi, an invisible force that kept his world spinning smoothly. He attended Riverside Preparatory Academy, a private school where tuition cost more than most people's annual salaries, and where students competed not over grades, but over who could appear most effortlessly wealthy. Tyler excelled in this environment. He was popular, athletic, academically capable, and socially adept. Teachers praised his leadership skills. Coaches valued his competitive drive. His peers admired his ability to organize elaborate social events and weekend excursions that always seemed to exceed everyone's expectations. But Tyler had one significant blind spot. He had never learned to see beyond the surface of things. He judged restaurants by their interior design rather than their food quality. He evaluated people by their clothing brands rather than their character. He measured success by appearance rather than substance. This perspective had served him well in his carefully curated environment, where everyone around him shared similar values and economic circumstances. I had been watching this development with growing concern for years. Tyler's parents had divorced when he was 12, and in their guilt over the disruption to his life, they had compensated with increasingly generous financial support. What started as occasional treats became regular luxuries, which evolved into an expectation of constant abundance. Neither parent wanted to be the one to set limits, so they competed to provide more lavish experiences, more expensive gifts, more freedom from consequences. My own relationship with Tyler had always been complicated by geography and circumstance. Sarah lived 45 minutes away, and while I was welcome to visit, the distance and social differences meant our interactions were limited to major holidays and special occasions. When Tyler was younger, he had enjoyed spending time at my house, fascinated by my garden, and interested in my stories about the neighborhood's history. But as he entered his teenage years, those visits became increasingly rare and strained. Tyler's attitude toward me had shifted gradually, but unmistakably. Where he once asked questions about my life and experiences, he now offered unsolicited advice about my appearance and lifestyle choices. He suggested I hire a personal shopper to update my wardrobe. He recommended restaurants I should try, apparently unaware that I had been eating at some of them since before he was born. He spoke to me with the patient condescension of someone explaining obvious concepts to someone too simple to understand them naturally. The most painful part wasn't his condescension but his genuine belief that he was helping. Tyler wasn't intentionally cruel. He was unconsciously entitled. He had been raised in an environment where money solved problems, where appearance determined value, and where comfort was a birthright, rather than an achievement. He looked at my simple lifestyle and saw deprivation rather than choice, limitation rather than freedom. This perspective became particularly evident during family gatherings, where Tyler would arrive in outfits that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and proceed to evaluate everyone else's presentation with the same critical eye he applied to restaurant reviews. He offered fashion advice to his cousins, suggested home improvement projects to his aunts and uncles, and spoke about brands and experiences with the assumption that everyone shared his priorities and interests. I had tried various approaches to connect with him over the years. I invited him to help with my garden, thinking physical work might provide perspective. He politely declined, explaining that outdoor labor would interfere with his skincare routine. I suggested we take a cooking class together, hoping to share a practical skill. He countered with a recommendation for a high-end culinary experience that cost 10 times as much and taught half as much. I offered to teach him about investing and financial planning, areas where my experience might prove valuable. He smiled and nodded but never followed up, apparently assuming that money management was something other people handled for him. The birthday party had been Tyler's idea, naturally. He had convinced his mother to rent the community center at Riverside Heights, hire a catering company, and invite not just family but his entire social circle from school. The event was planned with the same attention to detail as a wedding, complete with a professional photographer, a DJ, and decorations that transformed the space into something resembling a nightclub. Tyler had spent weeks planning his outfit for the occasion, settling on a custom-tailored navy blazer, Italian leather shoes, and a watch that cost more than my car. He moved through the party like a young politician, shaking hands, posing for photos, and accepting congratulations with practiced grace. Everything was perfect, curated, and expensive. And then there was me, in my comfortable cardigan and practical shoes, representing everything Tyler had learned to see as insufficient. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The Riverside Heights Community Center had been transformed into something that belonged in a luxury hotel rather than a suburban gathering space. Cascading white fabric draped from the ceiling, creating intimate alcoves lit by warm amber spotlights. Round tables covered in charcoal linens surrounded a central dance floor, each centerpiece a carefully arranged tower of white roses and eucalyptus that probably cost more than most families spent on groceries in a month. The catering staff moved like synchronized dancers, carrying silver trays of delicate appetizers that disappeared as quickly as they appeared. I arrived precisely at 7 o'clock, carrying a small wrapped gift and wearing what I considered my best outfit, a soft gray cardigan I had purchased at Macy's 3 years earlier, a pair of dark wash jeans that fit comfortably, and black leather flats that allowed me to walk without pain. My hair was freshly washed and styled in my usual low bun, and I wore the pearl earrings my late husband had given me for our 25th anniversary. To me, I looked presentable, appropriate, and respectful of the occasion. The moment I stepped through the entrance, I felt the subtle shift that occurs when someone who doesn't quite fit enters a carefully curated space. It wasn't dramatic or obvious, just a slight pause in conversations, a brief glance from the catering staff, a barely perceptible assessment from other guests. Tyler's friends, clustered near the bar in their designer ensembles, looked like they had stepped out of a fashion magazine. The adults, mostly parents from Riverside Preparatory Academy, wore the kind of casual elegance that requires significant effort and expense to achieve. Sarah greeted me with a warm hug and genuine smile, though I noticed her eyes flicker briefly over my outfit before settling back on my face. She looked stunning in an emerald silk blouse and tailored black pants, her jewelry subtle but clearly expensive. "Ruth, I'm so glad you could make it," she said, squeezing my hands. "Tyler has been looking forward to seeing you." That statement would prove to be optimistic. I made my way through the crowd, stopping to chat with relatives I hadn't seen in months. My nephew David complimented my cardigan, mentioning that the color brought out my eyes. My sister-in-law Margaret asked about my garden, genuinely interested in hearing about my latest tomato varieties. These conversations reminded me why I valued substance over style, why I prioritized genuine connections over impressive presentations. Tyler was holding court near the photo backdrop, elaborate arrangement of balloons and flowers that served as the evening's Instagram centerpiece. He looked magnificent in his tailored blazer, his smile bright and confident as he posed with various combinations of friends and family members. A professional photographer captured every angle, every laugh, every carefully orchestrated moment of celebration. I waited patiently for a break in the photography session, watching Tyler interact with his guests. He had inherited his father's charm and his mother's social grace, moving effortlessly between conversations, making everyone feel included and appreciated. Despite my growing concerns about his values, I felt genuine pride watching him navigate his social world with such skill and confidence. When the photographer finally stepped away to change lenses, I approached Tyler with my gift. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," I said, offering him the small wrapped package. "I hope you have a wonderful evening." Tyler accepted the gift with a smile that seemed genuine, at least initially. "Thanks, Grandma Ruth," he said, leaning down to give me a quick hug. "I'm glad you could make it." He unwrapped the gift carefully, revealing a vintage compass I had found at an antique shop in downtown Millfield. It was brass, beautifully engraved, and came with a small card explaining its history as a navigation tool used by Connecticut maritime captains in the 1800s. I had chosen it specifically because Tyler had once expressed interest in sailing, and I thought the compass might represent guidance and direction as he entered adulthood. Tyler examined the compass with what appeared to be polite interest, turning it over in his hands and reading the accompanying card. "This is really unique," he said, his tone carefully neutral. "Thank you." One of his friends, a girl named Madison, whose parents owned several car dealerships, leaned over to examine the gift. "Oh wow, that's so vintage," she said, her voice carrying the kind of enthusiasm that suggested she was trying to find something positive to say about an object she clearly didn't understand the value of. Another friend, a boy named Bryce, whose family had made their fortune in tech startups, glanced at the compass and then at me with barely concealed confusion. "Is it functional?" he asked, as if the concept of a tool that actually served a purpose was foreign to him. Tyler's smile became more strained as his friends continued to examine the compass with polite bewilderment. I could see him calculating the social implications of receiving a gift that didn't fit the evening's aesthetic, something that couldn't be immediately photographed for social media or casually mentioned in conversation as a status symbol. "It's actually quite valuable," I offered gently, hoping to provide context that might help Tyler appreciate the gift's significance. The dealer told me it belonged to a ship captain who used it during trading expeditions between Connecticut and the Caribbean in the 1890s. This explanation seemed to make things worse rather than better. Tyler's friends exchanged glances that suggested they found the historical context more quaint than impressive. In their world, age was generally associated with obsolescence rather than value, unless it involved luxury brands with carefully cultivated heritage marketing. Tyler carefully placed the compass back in its box and set it aside on a nearby table with the other gifts. "I'll definitely look into the history more," he said, his politician's smile masking what I suspected was disappointment. "That sounds really fascinating." The conversation might have recovered from there, might have moved on to other topics if I hadn't made the mistake of lingering. Instead of gracefully excusing myself to mingle with other guests, I stood there for a moment, hoping Tyler might ask questions about the compass or express genuine interest in its story. I wanted to tell him about the research I had done, about the shop owner who had shared the captain's journal entries, about why I thought navigation and direction might be meaningful gifts for someone beginning their adult journey. But Tyler was already scanning the room, his attention drawn to other guests who needed greeting, other conversations that required his presence. His friends had formed a loose circle that subtly excluded me, not through intentional rudeness but through the natural dynamics of generational and cultural difference. That's when Madison, apparently trying to make conversation, looked at my outfit more carefully. "Mrs. Morrison," she said with the kind of bright smile that often precedes social disasters, "I love how you just wear whatever makes you comfortable. That's so authentic." The word authentic hung in the air with the weight of damning praise. Tyler's attention snapped back to our conversation, his eyes focusing on me with new awareness. For the first time that evening, he seemed to really see what I was wearing, to process my appearance through the lens of his friends' expectations. I watched his expression change in real time, watched him notice the simple cardigan, the practical shoes, the absence of designer labels or trendy accessories. I saw him mentally compare my outfit to those of every other adult at the party, saw him calculate the social cost of being associated with someone who so clearly didn't understand the rules of his world. The silence stretched uncomfortably long. Tyler's friends waited for his response, their expressions politely expectant. The photographer hovered nearby, ready to resume taking pictures once the family interactions concluded. Other guests continued their conversations around us, unaware of the small social crisis developing in our corner of the room. Finally, Tyler spoke. His voice was quiet but not quiet enough, carrying clearly to his circle of friends and several nearby adults. "Grandma Ruth," he said, his tone mixing affection with exasperation, "you dress like a homeless person. Can't you try to look normal for once?" The words hit me like cold water, not because they were shouted or meant to be cruel, but because they were delivered with such casual certainty, as if pointing out an obvious fact that everyone could see but had been too polite to mention. Tyler wasn't trying to humiliate me, he was trying to help me understand my inadequacy, to guide me toward better choices that would reflect more positively on both of us. His friends' faces showed a mixture of embarrassment and fascination, the kind of expression people wear when witnessing something socially awkward but compelling. Madison covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes wide. Bryce looked down at his phone, suddenly very interested in whatever was on his screen. A few other nearby guests had overheard and were pretending they hadn't, their conversations becoming artificially animated. I felt the familiar weight of being judged and found wanting, of being reduced to my appearance and deemed insufficient. But underneath that familiar pain was something else, something harder and more focused. Tyler's words weren't just an insult, they were a revelation about how completely he misunderstood the world around him, how thoroughly he had been insulated from the realities that shaped most people's lives. I smiled, the kind of smile I had perfected during 45 years of business negotiations when someone had underestimated my capabilities. "You're absolutely right, Tyler," I said quietly. "I should definitely try to look more normal." Then I walked away, moving slowly and deliberately toward the kitchen area where the catering staff was preparing the next course. I needed a moment to process what had just happened, to let the implications settle into the quiet space where my important decisions were made. Tyler returned to his photography session, his friends resumed their conversations, and the party continued its elegant momentum. No one followed me or asked if I was all right. The incident was already being absorbed into the evening's social fabric, becoming just another minor moment in what was supposed to be Tyler's perfect celebration. But as I stood in the relative quiet of the service area, watching the efficient choreography of professional staff preparing an extravagant meal for people who had never questioned where their abundance came from, I began to formulate a very different kind of lesson plan. Tyler wanted normal. He was about to discover exactly what normal looked like for most people his age. The drive home from Tyler's party took me through downtown Millfield, past the row of shops and businesses that had watched me transform from a young widow with $200 to her name into something most people would never suspect. The antique compass Tyler had dismissed so casually came from Henderson's Collectibles, a shop I had quietly owned for 15 years. The building that housed it, along with the coffee shop next door and the small accounting firm upstairs, generated enough monthly income to fund Tyler's lavish lifestyle twice over. But Tyler didn't know that. Nobody did, really, except my attorney and my accountant, both of whom had learned decades ago that discretion was more valuable than publicity when it came to managing Ruth Morrison's financial affairs. I pulled into my driveway at 9:47 p.m., the porch light casting familiar shadows across the front steps I had climbed nearly every day for 45 years. The house looked exactly as modest as it always had. White clapboard siding that I painted myself every few years, a small front garden that I maintained with hand tools and stubborn determination, windows that I cleaned with newspaper and vinegar because it worked better than expensive cleaners. Nothing about the exterior suggested that the woman inside had systematically acquired real estate, businesses, and investments across 3 counties. I had learned the art of invisibility from necessity, not choice. When my husband Robert died suddenly of a heart attack in 1979, I was 31 years old with 2 small children and a job as a part-time bookkeeper at Miller's hardware store. The life insurance payout was modest, the savings account nearly empty, and the monthly bills unforgiving. I could have applied for assistance, could have moved in with family, could have made any number of choices that would have provided immediate relief and long-term dependence. Instead, I made a different calculation. I took the insurance money, exactly $8,400 after taxes, and instead of using it to cover living expenses, I used it as a down payment on a small duplex 3 blocks from my house. The building was run down, the previous owner motivated to sell quickly, and the financing terms brutal by today's standards. But the monthly rental income from both units covered the mortgage payment plus an extra $67, and that small surplus became the foundation of everything that followed. I spent my evenings after the children went to bed learning about real estate law, tax codes, and property management. I checked out books from the library on accounting principles, investment strategies, and small business operations. I took correspondence courses in bookkeeping and eventually earned my certification as a public accountant, all while working full-time and raising 2 children as a single mother. The duplex led to a second property, then a third. I learned to spot undervalued buildings before they hit the market, to negotiate with motivated sellers, to identify properties that could be improved with sweat equity rather than major capital investment. I painted apartments on weekends, fixed leaky faucets on weeknights, and showed units to potential tenants during my lunch breaks. Everything I earned went back into acquiring more properties, building a portfolio that grew steadily but quietly. By 1985, I owned 7 rental properties and had begun investing in small businesses. The hardware store where I worked was struggling financially, so I offered to buy it from Mr. Miller when he was ready to retire. He was so relieved to find a buyer who understood the business that he agreed to owner financing with terms that were almost embarrassingly favorable. Within 2 years, I had modernized the inventory system, expanded the product lines, and tripled the annual revenue. The pattern repeated itself across Millfield and the surrounding towns. I acquired businesses that were struggling but fundamentally sound. A small grocery store, a laundromat, a flower shop, always with minimal fanfare and always with the same patient approach to improvement and growth. I hired good managers, invested in necessary upgrades, and maintained the kind of steady, unremarkable operations that generated consistent profits without attracting attention. My children, David and Linda, grew up understanding that money was earned through work, saved through discipline, and invested through careful planning. They knew I owned rental properties and a small business, but they didn't grasp the full scope of what I was building. They did their homework at the kitchen table while I reviewed financial statements and investment reports. They helped me paint apartment walls and plant flowers in the rental property's small gardens. They learned to fix things rather than replace them, to maintain what they had rather than constantly acquire more. When David went to college in 1995, I paid his tuition in cash from a savings account that had been specifically designated for educational expenses. When Linda married her college sweetheart 2 years later, I wrote a check for her wedding that covered every expense without requiring financing or payment plans. Neither child questioned where the money came from. They simply understood that their mother was financially responsible and had planned ahead for their needs. David went on to become a successful attorney in Boston, eventually marrying Sarah Clark, a marketing executive from a wealthy Connecticut family. Their wedding was an elaborate affair held at the country club where Tyler would later celebrate his 18th birthday, and I attended in a simple navy dress that I purchased specifically for the occasion. Sarah's family was polite but clearly puzzled by David's background, unable to reconcile his obvious education and sophistication with his mother's modest appearance and unassuming lifestyle. Tyler was born in 2005, and I watched with growing concern as David and Sarah's marriage began to reflect the worst aspects of both their personalities. David had inherited my practicality but none of my patience. Sarah possessed considerable intelligence but applied it primarily to social climbing and status accumulation. They competed with each other constantly, over career achievements, social connections, and eventually over who could provide Tyler with more extravagant experiences and expensive possessions. The divorce proceedings in 2017 were bitter and expensive, with both parents hiring attorneys who specialized in high-asset divorces involving custody disputes. I watched from the sidelines as my son and daughter-in-law spent more money on legal fees than most families earned in a year, fighting over assets and arrangements that could have been resolved through basic communication and compromise. During the settlement negotiations, I made a decision that would prove crucial to understanding Tyler's current predicament. Sarah wanted to maintain the lifestyle Tyler had become accustomed to, but her own income wasn't sufficient to cover the private school tuition, extracurricular activities, and general expenses associated with raising a child in Riverside Heights. David's attorney fees and alimony obligations meant his contributions would be limited, at least initially. So I quietly established a trust fund that would supplement Tyler's expenses, with Sarah as the designated administrator and David as the backup trustee. The monthly disbursements were substantial enough to maintain Tyler's current standard of living without appearing excessive on paper. Neither parent questioned the funding source too closely. They were simply relieved that Tyler's needs would be met without requiring either of them to make significant lifestyle sacrifices. The trust was structured to appear like a standard grandparent educational fund, complete with official documentation and quarterly statements that satisfied everyone's need for transparency. What the documents didn't reveal was that the trust was funded not by a modest grandmother's life savings, but by the steady income stream from a diversified portfolio of real estate and business investments that had been growing systematically for nearly 4 decades. Tyler's monthly allowance of $2,500 represented less than 15% of my net monthly income from rental properties alone. The private school tuition, car payments, insurance premiums, and incidental expenses that Sarah classified as, quote, Kyler's costs were easily covered by the revenue from 3 small businesses I owned in neighboring towns. Tyler's entire lavish lifestyle was being funded by what amounted to a rounding error in my overall financial picture. But Tyler didn't know this. Sarah knew only that the money appeared reliably each month, and she had gradually stopped questioning its source. David assumed I was drawing down savings that I had accumulated during my working years, and he occasionally expressed concern about whether I was spending too much on Tyler's expenses relative to my own needs. The irony was exquisite. Tyler had spent years looking down on my simple lifestyle, interpreting my modest appearance and practical choices as evidence of financial limitation rather than financial wisdom. He saw my worn cardigans and aging Honda as signs of poverty rather than priorities. He interpreted my reluctance to spend money on unnecessary luxuries as inability rather than choice. What Tyler had never learned, what none of them understood, was that true wealth isn't about what you display but what you control. I controlled rental properties worth over $4 million. I controlled businesses that generated steady profits regardless of economic fluctuations. I controlled investment accounts that had weathered multiple market downturns and continued growing through compound interest and careful reinvestment. Most importantly, I controlled the financial foundation that made Tyler's entire lifestyle possible. Every designer shirt, every expensive dinner, every weekend trip to New York City was ultimately funded by a woman he considered too poor and unsophisticated to dress appropriately for his birthday party. As I sat in my kitchen that night reviewing the trust account statements that showed Tyler's spending patterns over the past 6 months, I realized I had created a monster. By insulating him from financial consequences, by allowing him to believe that abundance was his birthright rather than my gift, I had failed to teach him the most important lesson of all: respect for the source of his comfort. Tyler wanted me to look normal. He was about to discover what normal actually looked like when the extraordinary became ordinary, when the invisible became visible, and when the woman he had dismissed as inadequate revealed herself as indispensable. I opened my laptop and logged into the trust account management system. Tyler's next monthly allowance was scheduled to process automatically in 3 days. With a few keystrokes, I could change that schedule, modify those amounts, or suspend those transfers entirely. The power had always been mine. I had simply chosen not to use it. Until now. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in 15 years. I called in sick to my volunteer position at the Millfield Community Center. Mrs. Patterson, who coordinated the senior meal program, was concerned when I explained I needed a few personal days. In all the time I had been helping serve lunch to elderly residents, I had never missed a shift without advance notice. "Ruth, you sound different," she said over the phone. "Are you sure you're all right?" I was more than all right. I was focused in a way I hadn't been since the early days of building my business empire, when every decision carried weight and every move required strategic thinking. "I'm fine, Dorothy," I assured her. "I just have some family matters that need my attention." What I didn't tell her was that I planned to spend the next few days conducting the most thorough investigation of my grandson's life that modern technology and old-fashioned surveillance would allow. Tyler had dismissed me as irrelevant, but irrelevant people have certain advantages. They can observe without being noticed, listen without being heard, and gather information without raising suspicion. I began with Tyler's digital footprint, starting with the social media accounts he had made public in his quest for maximum visibility. His Instagram feed was a carefully curated gallery of his daily life, each post designed to showcase his affluence and social connections. I scrolled through months of content, noting patterns in his spending, his social circle, and his activities. The most recent posts documented the birthday party, of course. Tyler had uploaded 17 photos and 3 video clips of the event, each tagged with location information and branded hashtags. He appeared in every image, always positioned centrally, always perfectly groomed. The captions were crafted with the precision of marketing copy, grateful for another year of blessings and surrounded by the best people, and living my best life with my incredible squad. What struck me wasn't the vanity. 18-year-olds had always been self-absorbed, but the complete absence of gratitude toward anyone who had made the party possible. There were no thanks to his mother for organizing the event, no acknowledgement of the catering staff who had worked seamlessly to create the experience, no recognition of the photographer who had captured every perfect moment. In Tyler's narrative, the party had simply manifested around him, as if his mere existence had been sufficient to create such lavish celebration. I screenshot every post and saved them to a folder on my desktop, labeled Research. Then I moved deeper into his posting history, examining his spending patterns through the lens of someone who understood exactly where his money originated. The pattern was stunning in its consistency. Tyler posted from expensive restaurants at least 4 times per week, always ordering premium dishes and top-shelf beverages. His weekend activities included spa treatments, shopping expeditions to luxury malls, and recreational activities that required significant equipment rental or facility fees. He attended concerts and sporting events with tickets that typically cost several $100s each, and he always seemed to be accompanied by friends whose own expenses he frequently covered. One post from 3 weeks earlier showed Tyler and 4 friends at a steakhouse in downtown Hartford, the table covered with dishes that would have cost most families a week's grocery budget. The caption read, "When you find a crew that appreciates the finer things, dinner's on me tonight." The image had received 247 likes and dozens of comments praising Tyler's generosity and lifestyle. Another post documented a weekend trip to Cape Cod, where Tyler had rented a vacation house for himself and 6 friends. The photos showed them lounging on expensive outdoor furniture, playing with rented jet skis, and dining at waterfront restaurants. Tyler had tagged the rental property and several high-end establishments, creating a digital trail that allowed me to calculate the weekend's cost at approximately $3,200, not including transportation and incidentals. I opened a spreadsheet and began documenting Tyler's expenses based on his social media activity alone. Restaurant meals averaged $180 per person when he was paying for the group. Individual meals at upscale establishments ran between $75 to $120. Entertainment expenses varied from $200 to $500 per outing. And his clothing purchases, which he documented religiously, typically ranged from $300 for casual items to over $1,000 for formal wear. The numbers were staggering, but not because they were large relative to my financial capacity. They were staggering because they represented a complete disconnection from the value of money and the effort required to earn it. Tyler was spending more on individual dinners than many of his peers' families allocated for entire weeks of meals. His casual shopping expeditions cost more than most people his age earned in months of part-time employment. But the most revealing aspect of Tyler's digital presence wasn't his spending. It was his complete lack of awareness about how unusual his lifestyle actually was. He posted about his expenses without self-consciousness, tagged expensive locations without irony, and documented luxury experiences as if they were ordinary parts of teenage life. There was no recognition that his circumstances were exceptional, no acknowledgement that his opportunities were limited to a very small percentage of people his age. I moved from social media to more concrete sources of information. As the administrator of Tyler's trust fund, Sarah received detailed monthly statements showing every transaction processed through the account. She had authorized me to access these records years ago as a backup in case she became unavailable, a precaution we had both forgotten about, but which now proved invaluable. The banking records told an even more complete story than Tyler's social media posts. Every purchase was documented with timestamps, locations, and merchant information. I could see exactly when Tyler bought coffee, $8.50 for a specialty drink at the campus cafe, when he filled his car with premium gasoline, $67.43 at the station near Riverside Prep, and when he made impulse purchases at luxury retailers, $347.82 at a designer clothing store, $156.99 at an electronics boutique, $89.50 at a specialty skincare shop. The data revealed patterns that Tyler himself probably wasn't aware of. He spent money constantly, not just on major purchases or special occasions, but in a steady stream of small transactions that added up to extraordinary monthly totals. A $12 smoothie here, a $25 car wash there, a $45 lunch that seemed reasonable until you realized it happened 5 times per week. More telling were the merchant categories that appeared repeatedly in his statements. Tyler was a regular customer at high-end barbershops where haircuts cost $75 plus tip. He frequented spas that charged $120 for facial treatments. He patronized clothing stores where the average transaction exceeded $200. He purchased coffee and meals almost exclusively from establishments that catered to affluent customers, apparently unaware that less expensive alternatives existed. I spent 2 full days analyzing 6 months of Tyler's financial records, creating detailed spreadsheets that categorized his spending by type, frequency, and necessity. The results painted a picture of someone who had never experienced financial limitation, never calculated the cost of his choices, and never considered the relationship between his expenditures and someone else's labor. But numbers only told part of the story. To understand Tyler's complete ecosystem, I needed to observe his daily routines and social interactions firsthand. This required a more delicate approach, since Tyler knew my car and would recognize me if I appeared in his usual locations. I solved this problem by enlisting my neighbor Mrs. Chen, who had recently purchased a new silver sedan that Tyler had never seen. Mrs. Chen was retired, enjoyed modest adventures, and was curious enough about my family research project to agree to serve as my occasional driver. I told her I wanted to understand Tyler's daily life better so I could relate to him more effectively, which was technically true if incomplete. Our first surveillance mission took us to Riverside Preparatory Academy during the lunch period. I sat in Mrs. Chen's passenger seat with a pair of binoculars I normally used for birdwatching, observing Tyler and his friends as they ate at the outdoor dining area. Even from a distance, I could see the hierarchy that governed their social interactions. Tyler occupied the center of the group, naturally commanding attention and directing conversation. His friends deferred to his opinions, laughed at his jokes, and sought his approval in subtle but unmistakable ways. When lunch ended, Tyler casually handed his credit card to one of his friends to cover the entire table's meal, a gesture that appeared generous, but actually demonstrated his power within the group. After school, we followed Tyler's BMW to an upscale shopping center where he met with a different group of friends. They spent 2 hours browsing stores, with Tyler making several purchases and offering to buy items for friends who admired things they couldn't afford. Again, his generosity seemed spontaneous and natural, but I recognized it as the behavior of someone who had learned that money could buy influence and loyalty. That evening, Mrs. Chen and I positioned ourselves outside the movie theater, where Tyler had posted about meeting friends for a premium screening experience. We watched him arrive in his BMW, greet his companions with elaborate handshakes and embraces, and lead them into the theater complex. 40 minutes later, they emerged with expensive concessions and headed toward the luxury screening room that charged 3 times the price of regular tickets. Over the course of a week, I documented Tyler's routines with the thoroughness of a private investigator. I learned that he spent approximately $400 per week on meals and beverages, not including the money he spent treating friends. I observed that his social calendar was packed with activities that required constant financial investment, not just for himself, but for maintaining his role as the group's unofficial sponsor. I noted that he never comparison shopped, never looked for discounts, and never seemed to calculate the cumulative cost of his choices. Most importantly, I confirmed that Tyler had absolutely no understanding of his financial reality. He moved through his expensive world with the confidence of someone who believed his lifestyle was sustainable indefinitely, who had never considered the possibility that his circumstances might change, and who had never been required to connect his consumption to its source. Tyler lived in a bubble of artificial abundance that I had created and maintained for 3 years. He had become dependent on a lifestyle that required constant financial support, but he had never acknowledged that dependence or expressed gratitude for it. He had surrounded himself with friends who valued him primarily for his ability to fund their social activities, but he had convinced himself that their loyalty was based on his personal qualities rather than his economic utility. As I sat in my kitchen that evening, reviewing my notes and calculations, I realized that Tyler's insult at the birthday party hadn't been an isolated moment of rudeness. It had been the inevitable result of a fundamental misunderstanding about how the world actually worked, a misunderstanding that I had accidentally fostered by making his life too easy. Tyler had called me homeless, not knowing that I owned the buildings where some of his friends' families rented office space. He had criticized my appearance, not realizing that I chose simplicity over ostentation as a matter of principle rather than necessity. He had dismissed me as irrelevant, unaware that I was the invisible foundation supporting his entire artificial world. The time had come to provide him with the more accurate education about reality, economics, and respect. Tyler wanted me to look normal. I was about to show him what normal actually looked like when the subsidies stopped flowing and the safety net disappeared. The lesson would begin with his next monthly allowance, which was scheduled to process in exactly 18 hours. At 6:30 a.m. on Monday morning, exactly 72 hours after Tyler's birthday party, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open and a cup of black coffee growing cold beside me. The automatic transfer that would deposit $2,500 into Tyler's checking account was scheduled to process at 9 a.m., just as it had on the first of every month for the past 3 years. This morning, that transfer would not occur, but canceling Tyler's allowance was only the beginning of what I had planned. Over the weekend, I had designed a comprehensive financial education program that would teach Tyler about reality in the most direct way possible. by allowing him to experience it firsthand. The lesson plan I had developed was more thorough than anything he would encounter in his expensive private school, and far more practical than any economics course taught in a classroom. I opened the Trust Account Management portal and navigated to the automatic payment settings. Tyler's monthly allowance appeared as a recurring transfer scheduled for the first business day of each month. With 3 clicks, I suspended the transfer indefinitely. The system prompted me to provide a reason for the suspension. In the comment field, I typed, "Educational adjustment per trustee discretion." Next, I accessed Tyler's credit card accounts. As the trust fund administrator, Sarah had established several credit cards linked to the trust to ensure Tyler could cover unexpected expenses and emergency situations. There were 3 cards in total: a primary Visa with a $5,000 limit for general use, an American Express card with a $3,000 limit for dining and entertainment, and a MasterCard with a $2,000 limit designated for clothing and personal items. I didn't cancel the credit cards. That would have been too dramatic and might have prompted immediate intervention from Sarah or David. Instead, I reduced each credit limit to $50, just enough to cover small purchases like coffee or lunch at the school cafeteria, but insufficient for Tyler's typical spending patterns. The system allowed me to implement these changes immediately without requiring additional authorization. Tyler's car presented a more complex challenge. The BMW was registered in Sarah's name, but insured through a policy paid by the trust fund. I couldn't simply cancel the insurance without creating legal complications, but I could modify the coverage and payment schedule in ways that would create immediate consequences for Tyler's behavior. I called the insurance company and spoke with a customer service representative who had helped me manage various policies over the years. "Mrs. Morrison," she said warmly, "how can I help you today?" "I need to modify the coverage on Tyler Morrison Clark's vehicle," I explained. "We're implementing some budgetary changes, and I'd like to reduce the coverage to state minimums and switch to a pay-per-month plan rather than automatic annual renewal." The representative pulled up Tyler's policy and reviewed the current coverage. "I see he has comprehensive coverage with a $500 deductible, plus roadside assistance and rental car coverage. You want to reduce this to basic liability only?" "That's correct. And I'd like the first monthly payment to be due this Friday, with subsequent payments due on the 15th of each month." This timing was crucial. Tyler would receive notice of the coverage change within 24 hours. And the first payment would be due exactly when his normal spending patterns would have depleted his reduced credit limits. "I can make those changes, but I should mention that basic liability coverage won't protect the vehicle itself if it's damaged or stolen, given the value of the car." "I understand the implications," I assured her. "We're teaching responsibility through natural consequences." The insurance modification would serve multiple purposes. Tyler would face an immediate premium payment that exceeded his available credit, forcing him to confront his first real financial limitation. If he failed to make the payment on time, his driving privileges would be suspended, creating transportation challenges that couldn't be solved with charm or social connections. Most importantly, the reduced coverage would make Tyler personally liable for any damage to his expensive car, creating genuine stakes for his decision-making. Next, I addressed Tyler's meal plan at Riverside Preparatory Academy. The school offered several dining options, from a basic cafeteria plan that covered standard meals to premium arrangements that included gourmet options and unlimited a la carte purchases. Tyler, naturally, had the most expensive plan available, which cost $4,800 per semester, and allowed him to eat anything he wanted, anytime he wanted, without considering cost. I called the school's business office and spoke with Mrs. Reynolds, who handled student account modifications. "I need to downgrade Tyler Morrison Clark's meal plan," I explained. "We're implementing some budgetary discipline, and I'd like to switch him to the basic plan effective immediately." Mrs. Reynolds pulled up Tyler's account. "He's currently on our premium unlimited plan. The basic plan only covers breakfast, lunch, and dinner in the main cafeteria, with no a la carte privileges. Are you sure about this change?" "Absolutely. And I'd like to set a spending limit of $20 per week for any additional food purchases." "I can make that change, but it will take effect tomorrow morning. He'll receive an email notification tonight explaining the new restrictions." This modification would force Tyler to eat the same food as students whose families couldn't afford premium dining options. He would have to plan his meals around fixed times and limited choices, rather than treating the school's restaurants like his personal catering service. The $20 weekly limit would allow him to buy occasional snacks or beverages, but only if he managed his purchases carefully. The most significant element of my preparation involved Tyler's living situation at Sarah's house. While I couldn't directly control Sarah's decisions about household rules or privileges, I could influence them by modifying the financial arrangements that made Tyler's current lifestyle possible. I drafted a formal letter to Sarah, written on official trust fund letterhead that I had created years earlier for administrative purposes. The letter explained that recent fiscal review protocols had identified expenditure patterns inconsistent with the trust's educational objectives and required, quote, immediate implementation of budgetary discipline measures. The language was deliberately bureaucratic and official-sounding, designed to make the changes appear like standard trust fund management rather than personal decisions. I explained that Tyler's monthly allowance would be suspended for an evaluation period while we assessed the effectiveness of current financial education strategies. I mentioned that this was a, quote, temporary adjustment that would be reviewed quarterly based on documented progress toward financial responsibility goals. The letter didn't mention Tyler's insult at the birthday party or my emotional response to his behavior. Instead, it presented the changes as routine administrative actions taken in Tyler's best interests, designed to prepare him for independent financial management in his upcoming college years. I also prepared a supplementary document outlining Tyler's new financial responsibility development plan. This plan established specific requirements Tyler would need to meet in order to restore his previous allowance levels. He would need to find part-time employment and maintain steady work for at least 3 months. He would need to create and follow a personal budget that allocated money for necessities, savings, and discretionary spending. He would need to complete a financial literacy course and pass a comprehensive exam on topics like compound interest, credit management, and investment basics. Most importantly, Tyler would need to demonstrate respect for financial contributors by acknowledging the source of his previous lifestyle and expressing genuine gratitude for the opportunities he had received. This requirement was deliberately subjective, giving me complete discretion over when and whether Tyler had truly learned the intended lessons. I printed multiple copies of both documents and placed them in official-looking envelopes addressed to Sarah, David, and Tyler, respectively. Each envelope contained the same information, ensuring that everyone would receive identical explanations for the sudden changes in Tyler's financial situation. The final element of my preparation involved establishing new systems for monitoring Tyler's response to his changed circumstances. I created email alerts linked to his bank accounts and credit cards, so I would receive immediate notification of any attempts to circumvent the new limitations. I set up Google alerts for Tyler's name and social media handles, allowing me to track any public discussions of his financial difficulties. I also prepared contingency plans for various scenarios. If Tyler attempted to negotiate with his parents for increased support, I had documentation showing his excessive spending patterns that would justify the restrictions. If he tried to find creative ways around the limitations, I had additional measures I could implement. If he genuinely embraced the opportunity to learn financial responsibility, I had a graduated plan for gradually restoring some of his previous privileges. The beauty of my approach was its sustainability. Unlike an emotional confrontation or dramatic gesture, these financial restrictions could be maintained indefinitely, with minimal effort on my part. Tyler couldn't charm his way out of automatic system limitations. He couldn't manipulate computer algorithms or convince banking software to ignore programmed restrictions. He would have to either adapt to his new reality or find legitimate ways to improve his situation. By 8:45 a.m., all the preparatory work was complete. Tyler's allowance transfer had been suspended, his credit limits reduced, his insurance coverage modified, his meal plan downgraded, and his parents notified of the changes. In 15 minutes, Tyler would wake up to discover that his world had fundamentally changed overnight, though he wouldn't understand the full scope of the changes until he attempted to maintain his usual spending patterns. I closed my laptop and finished my coffee. feeling a sense of calm satisfaction that reminded me of the early days of building my business empire. There was something deeply fulfilling about solving complex problems through careful planning and strategic thinking. Tyler had called me homeless, but I was about to teach him what economic insecurity actually felt like. The lesson would begin the moment he tried to buy his usual $8.50 specialty coffee on his way to school. Tyler's first indication that something had changed came at 7:23 a.m. on Tuesday morning, when he stopped at Brew and Bean, the upscale coffee shop 2 blocks from Riverside Preparatory Academy. He ordered his usual, a large Madagascar vanilla latte with oat milk, an extra shot of espresso, and a maple pecan Danish pastry. The total came to $14.75, well within his normal spending range, but just above his newly reduced credit limit of $50 across all his cards combined. I wasn't there to witness Tyler's confusion when his primary Visa card was declined, but Mrs. Chen had agreed to position herself at a nearby table with her morning newspaper and text me updates. Her first message arrived at 7:26 a.m. Card declined. He looks puzzled. Trying second card. The American Express card was also declined. Then the MasterCard. Tyler stood at the counter with 3 rejected credit cards spread in front of him, his face transitioning from confusion to embarrassment as a line of other students formed behind him. The barista, a college-aged girl who recognized Tyler as a regular customer, tried to be helpful. "Sometimes the readers are finicky," she offered. "Do you want to try running them again?" Tyler nodded eagerly, but the results were identical. Mrs. Chen's next text read, "All cards rejected. He's checking his phone now." Face getting red. Tyler stepped aside to allow other customers to order while he frantically checked his banking app. His checking account showed a balance of $127.43, the remainder from his previous month's allowance after his weekend spending spree. But there was no new deposit, no fresh infusion of the $2,500 that should have appeared overnight like clockwork. Mrs. Chen sent another update. Borrowed $15 from friend. Got his coffee but looks shaken. Heading to car now. This was exactly the scenario I had anticipated. Tyler's first instinct when confronted with financial limitation was to solve the immediate problem through social borrowing, rather than examining the underlying cause. He had obtained his coffee and pastry, but at the cost of owing money to a peer and experiencing public embarrassment. More importantly, he had just used up most of his available cash for a single breakfast, leaving him with approximately $112 to cover all other expenses until he could figure out what had gone wrong. The second phase of Tyler's education began during lunch period at Riverside Prep. His usual routine involved meeting friends at Gramercy Hall, the school's upscale dining facility that served restaurant-quality meals with prices to match. Tyler typically ordered elaborate lunches that cost between $25 to $35, often treating 1 or 2 friends as a gesture of casual generosity. But when Tyler tried to use his student ID to charge lunch to his account, the transaction was blocked. The cashier, a middle-aged woman who had processed hundreds of Tyler's purchases over the past 3 years, looked genuinely concerned. "I'm sorry, Tyler, but your account shows you've exceeded your weekly dining limit. You'll need to use cash or a credit card for any additional purchases." Tyler stared at her in genuine bewilderment. "That's impossible. I have the unlimited plan." The cashier checked her computer screen again. "It shows here that your plan was changed to basic yesterday evening. You have $14.50 remaining in your weekly allowance, which will reset on Sunday. I had arranged for Mrs. Patterson from the community center to have lunch with a friend near the school that day, providing me with another set of eyes on Tyler's reaction." Her text message captured the moment perfectly. Young man at register arguing with cashier, very upset about food charges, several students watching. Tyler's friends gathered around him as he struggled to understand the new restrictions. Madison Torres, whose family owned the car dealerships, offered to pay for his lunch, but Tyler declined with forced nonchalance. "It's just some administrative mix-up," he said. "I'll grab something from the basic cafeteria and sort this out later." The basic cafeteria served standard institutional food: hamburgers, pizza slices, salads, and sandwiches that were adequate but unremarkable. Tyler, who hadn't eaten cafeteria food since his freshman year, stood in line with students whose families couldn't afford premium dining plans. The experience was jarring, not because the food was terrible, but because it forced him to confront a reality he had forgotten existed within his own school. He selected a turkey sandwich, a bag of chips, and a bottle of water. Total cost $6.50, and ate alone at a corner table while his friends enjoyed their usual elaborate meals in Gramercy Hall. Mrs. Patterson's final text of the day read, "Eating alone now, keeps checking his phone, looks lost." The third revelation came when Tyler attempted to leave school that afternoon. As he approached his BMW in the student parking lot, he found a bright orange notice tucked under the windshield wiper. The insurance company had sent notification that his coverage had been reduced to state minimums and that his first monthly payment of $347.82 was due by Friday to maintain any coverage at all. Tyler called the insurance company from his car, convinced there had been some mistake. I had anticipated this call and prepared Mrs. Chen to monitor the situation from the parking lot. According to her observations, Tyler spent 25 minutes on the phone, his voice rising in frustration as he was transferred between departments and asked to verify information he had never needed to know before. The insurance representative explained that the changes had been authorized by the trust fund administrator and were effective immediately. If Tyler wanted to restore his previous coverage levels, he would need written authorization from the trust administrator, along with payment for the increased premiums. If he failed to make the Friday payment, his driving privileges would be suspended. That evening, Tyler received 3 identical envelopes delivered to Sarah's house by courier service. One was addressed to him personally, one to his mother, and one to his father. Inside each envelope was my carefully crafted letter explaining the Financial Responsibility Development Plan and the suspension of his monthly allowance pending completion of specific educational requirements. I had arranged for Mrs. Chen to drive past Sarah's house around the time the courier was scheduled to arrive. Her text at 6:45 p.m. confirmed delivery. Fancy courier van at the house. Young man signing for packages. Mother came outside looking concerned. Sarah called me within an hour of receiving the letter. Her voice was carefully controlled, but I could hear the underlying panic. "Ruth, I got your letter about Tyler's trust fund. I need to understand what's happening here." "It's all explained in the documentation, Sarah," I replied calmly. The Trust Oversight Committee felt that Tyler's spending patterns weren't consistent with developing financial responsibility. This is a temporary educational intervention. "What Trust Oversight Committee? I thought you were the administrator." "I am, but I have fiduciary responsibilities to ensure the funds are used in Tyler's best interests. Recent spending analysis suggested that immediate intervention was necessary." Sarah's voice became more strained. "Ruth, Tyler has obligations. School expenses, social commitments, car payments. He can't just suddenly have no income." "The plan provides clear guidelines for restoring his allowance," I explained. "Tyler needs to demonstrate that he can manage money responsibly before he can access larger amounts. Surely you agree that's reasonable preparation for college." The call lasted 45 minutes, with Sarah alternately pleading, arguing, and attempting to negotiate modifications to the restrictions. I listened patiently, occasionally asking questions about Tyler's spending habits that highlighted exactly how excessive his lifestyle had become. When Sarah mentioned that Tyler spent only $200 per week on restaurants, I let the silence hang until she realized how that sounded. David called an hour later with a different approach. As an attorney, he had reviewed the trust documents and discovered that I did indeed have discretionary authority over distributions. His tone was professional but frustrated. "Mom, I understand your concern about Tyler's spending, but this seems like an extreme response. Couldn't we have discussed this as a family?" "Tyler made it clear at his birthday party that he doesn't value family input," I replied. "He was quite specific about finding my presence embarrassing. I'm simply removing that embarrassment by removing my financial support." David paused, clearly recognizing the connection between Tyler's insult and the sudden policy changes. "He's 18, Mom. Teenagers say thoughtless things. This punishment seems disproportionate." "It's not punishment, David. It's education." Tyler has never learned the relationship between work and money, between respect and support, between choices and consequences. This program addresses those gaps. But he starts college in 4 months. He needs financial stability to focus on his studies. He'll have exactly as much financial stability as he earns through demonstrating responsibility, I said. The requirements are clearly outlined. If Tyler wants his allowance restored, he knows what he needs to do. Tyler himself didn't call that night, but I received updates about his activities through Mrs. Chen's discreet observation posts around the neighborhood. He had driven to 3 different ATMs trying to access cash from various accounts, apparently unaware that his credit limits had been reduced rather than his balances eliminated. He had visited 2 friends' houses, presumably seeking temporary financial support or trying to understand what had happened. By 10 p.m., Tyler's BMW was parked in Sarah's driveway, and the lights in his bedroom were on. Mrs. Chen's final text of the evening read, "Lights been on for hours. Silhouette pacing by window. Looks like he's on phone." I spent that evening reviewing the day's financial data from Tyler's accounts. He had made only 3 transactions: the $15 borrowed coffee purchase, the $6.50 cafeteria lunch, and a $3.99 purchase at a convenience store for gum and an energy drink. His total spending for the day was $25.49, compared to his usual daily average of $127. More importantly, Tyler had experienced his first genuine financial stress. For the first time in his adult life, he had been forced to consider the cost of his choices, to calculate whether he could afford something he wanted, and to navigate the social embarrassment of having insufficient resources. He had borrowed money from a friend, eaten institutional food, and faced the prospect of losing his transportation, all consequences that flowed directly from his own actions and attitudes. The beauty of the situation was its sustainability. Unlike a temporary punishment that would end after a set period, Tyler's new reality would continue indefinitely until he took specific steps to change it. He couldn't wait it out, couldn't charm his way through it, and couldn't rely on his usual social advantages to solve it. Tyler wanted me to look normal. Starting tomorrow, he would discover exactly what normal looked like when you had to earn your money, instead of simply expecting it to appear. By Friday morning, Tyler's carefully constructed social world had begun to crack in ways that no amount of charm or privilege could repair. His car insurance payment was due in 6 hours. His checking account balance had dwindled to $73.18, and his credit cards remained useless for anything beyond small purchases. More significantly, word of his financial difficulties had begun to spread through Riverside Preparatory Academy, with the ruthless efficiency that only teenage social networks can achieve. The first major revelation came during second period when Madison Torres approached Tyler at his locker with an expression of carefully manufactured concern. "Tyler, honey," she said, her voice carrying just loud enough for nearby students to overhear. "My dad heard that your family might be having some financial issues. He wanted me to ask if you needed help with anything." Tyler's face went white. Madison's father owned the largest automotive dealership group in Connecticut, and his concern about other families' financial stability was legendary among the private school community. When Richard Torres began asking about someone's money troubles, it usually meant those troubles had become visible enough to generate gossip at country club poker games and charity fundraiser dinners. "There aren't any financial issues," Tyler said quickly, his voice pitched higher than usual. "There was just some mix-up with my trust fund that's getting sorted out." Madison nodded with the kind of sympathetic expression that indicated she didn't believe him but was too polite to say so directly. "Of course. Well, if you need anything at all, you know we're here for you." The conversation was witnessed by at least 6 other students, and by lunchtime, speculation about Tyler's circumstances had reached every social circle in the school. The theories ranged from family business failures to parental gambling problems to federal tax investigations. None of the rumors were accurate, but they all shared a common theme. Tyler Morrison Clark, who had seemed financially invincible just a week earlier, was apparently facing some kind of economic catastrophe. Mrs. Patterson, who had agreed to continue monitoring the situation from her strategic position near the school, sent me updates throughout the day that painted a picture of Tyler's growing social isolation. Students who had previously competed for his attention were now maintaining careful distance, apparently concerned that association with financial instability might be contagious. Teachers who had grown accustomed to Tyler's frequent absences for expensive social activities were suddenly finding him present for every class, with no weekend trips or exclusive events, pulling him away from academic responsibilities. The most significant development came during lunch period, when Tyler's closest friend, Bryce Henderson, approached him with what appeared to be a prepared speech. Bryce's family had built their fortune through tech startups and venture capital investments, and he had been Tyler's most reliable companion for expensive social activities. "Dude," Bryce said, settling into the seat across from Tyler in the basic cafeteria, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be straight with me." Tyler looked up from his institutional pizza slice with obvious wariness. "What's up? Are you broke?" The question hung in the air between them, like a challenge. Tyler's first instinct was clearly to deny it, to maintain the facade that everything was normal and under control. But something in Bryce's expression suggested that a simple denial wouldn't be sufficient. "It's complicated," Tyler said finally. "There are some family trust issues that need to get resolved." Bryce nodded slowly. "Okay, but here's the thing. My parents are planning this huge graduation party next month, and they've already put down deposits based on the guest list we gave them. If you can't afford to participate in the group activities we've got planned," he didn't finish the sentence, but the implication was clear. Tyler's social value had always been tied to his ability to contribute financially to group activities. If he couldn't maintain that contribution, his place in the social hierarchy would need to be reevaluated. "I'll figure it out," Tyler said quietly. "The trust thing should be resolved soon." Bryce looked skeptical but nodded. "Cool. Just keep me posted, you know. We've got that weekend in the Hamptons coming up, and the house rental alone is going to be like $800 per person." That evening, Tyler made his first serious attempt to understand his financial situation. He called the trust fund management company and spent 45 minutes on hold before reaching a customer service representative who could access his account information. The conversation, which I was able to monitor through the account management system, revealed the full scope of Tyler's helplessness when it came to basic financial concepts. Tyler didn't understand the difference between account balances and available credit. He couldn't explain why his monthly allowance had been suspended, or what requirements he needed to meet to restore it. He had never read the trust fund documentation that governed his access to money, and he was unaware that the trust had specific educational objectives that his spending needed to support. Most revealing was Tyler's assumption that the financial restrictions were temporary technical problems rather than deliberate policy changes. He kept asking when the glitch would be fixed and his normal allowance restored, unable to comprehend that his access to money was contingent on his behavior and choices rather than automatic. The customer service representative, following the script I had provided, explained that Tyler would need to speak directly with the trust administrator about policy changes and requirements. When Tyler asked for my contact information, he was told that all communication regarding trust fund modifications needed to be initiated by the beneficiary in writing, following proper protocols. This requirement forced Tyler to confront a reality he had been avoiding. He would need to contact me directly and acknowledge that he needed something from the woman he had insulted as homeless just 1 week earlier. The irony was perfect, but Tyler was still too proud and too confused to fully appreciate it. Saturday morning brought Tyler's first real crisis. His car insurance payment was past due, and the insurance company had sent a final notice that coverage would be suspended at 5 p.m. unless payment was received. Tyler had spent Friday evening calculating and recalculating his available resources, but the numbers didn't change. He had $68.43 in cash and $50 in available credit across all his cards, while the insurance payment required $347.82. Tyler's first attempt to solve the problem was to ask Sarah for financial help. According to Mrs. Chen, who had positioned herself at a coffee shop across from Sarah's office building, Tyler arrived at his mother's workplace around 10 a.m., looking uncharacteristically anxious. The conversation lasted nearly an hour, and Tyler emerged looking even more distressed than when he had entered. Sarah called me that afternoon to explain Tyler's visit. "Ruth, he came to me in tears," she said, her voice strained with worry. "He doesn't understand what's happening or why his money stopped coming. He's terrified that he won't be able to drive to school or participate in any social activities. What did you tell him? I asked. I told him he needed to read the documentation you sent and follow the requirements if he wanted his allowance restored. But Ruth, he's just a kid. This seems cruel. He's 18 years old, I replied. He's old enough to vote, old enough to serve in the military, and old enough to take responsibility for his choices. If he finds his situation uncomfortable, he has clear steps he can take to improve it. But he doesn't have any job experience. He doesn't know how to look for work or manage a budget. You're asking him to learn everything at once. I'm asking him to learn what most people his age already know, I said. The only difference is that Tyler has been insulated from normal financial reality by privilege he never earned or acknowledged. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. He asked me about you, she said finally. He wanted to know if you were really poor, or if there was something he didn't understand about your situation. This was the moment I had been waiting for. What did you tell him? I told him he should ask you himself. By Sunday evening, Tyler had exhausted all his options, except the one he was most reluctant to pursue. He had asked both parents for money, and been referred back to the trust fund requirements. He had explored part-time job opportunities, and discovered that most positions required experience he didn't have, or offered wages that wouldn't cover his current expenses. He had calculated his monthly costs, and realized that his lifestyle required an income level that would take years to achieve through entry-level employment. Most importantly, Tyler had spent the weekend experiencing authentic financial anxiety for the first time in his life. He had felt the stress of having bills he couldn't pay, the embarrassment of being unable to participate in social activities, and the isolation that comes from suddenly being unable to maintain previous social relationships. Mrs. Chen's surveillance reports from the weekend painted a picture of Tyler spending hours alone in his room, apparently researching financial concepts and job opportunities on his laptop. He had made several trips to ATMs, apparently hoping that his financial situation would somehow resolve itself automatically. He had driven past my house twice on Sunday afternoon, slowing down both times but never stopping or getting out of his car. The breakthrough came Sunday night at 11:47 p.m. when my phone rang. Tyler's name appeared on the caller ID, and I let it ring 4 times before answering, wanting him to feel the weight of reaching out for help. "Hello, Tyler," I said calmly. "Grandma Ruth." His voice was smaller than I had ever heard it, stripped of the confident arrogance that had characterized our previous interactions. "I need to talk to you." "I'm listening." "I don't understand what's happening with my money. Everything stopped working, and I can't fix it, and everyone's telling me I need to talk to you." I let the silence stretch for several seconds before responding. "Are you asking me for help, Tyler?" "Yes." The word came out as barely more than a whisper. "And what makes you think I'm the right person to help you? After all, I'm just a homeless person who embarrasses you at social events." The silence that followed was so long I wondered if Tyler had hung up. When he finally spoke, his voice was shaking. "I'm sorry I said that. I was wrong, and I'm sorry." "What exactly are you sorry for, Tyler?" "I'm sorry I said you dress like a homeless person. I'm sorry I was rude to you at my party. I'm sorry I didn't appreciate the compass you gave me." I could hear him crying softly on the other end of the line. "Those are good starts, Tyler. But do you understand why your financial situation changed? Because I hurt your feelings? No, Tyler. Because you demonstrated that you don't understand the value of money, the effort required to earn it, or the respect owed to people who support you. Your allowance didn't stop because I was angry. It stopped because you needed to learn lessons that comfort had prevented you from learning. What do I have to do to get my money back? You need to read the requirements I sent you," I said, "and then you need to decide whether you're ready to earn back the privileges you took for granted." "Will you help me?" he asked. "Tyler," I said gently, "I've been helping you for 3 years. You just never knew it." 2 weeks after Tyler's tearful phone call, I sat across from him at a small corner table in Henderson's diner, watching him carefully study a job application for a position at the local recreation center. His appearance had changed dramatically since his birthday party. Gone were the designer clothes and perfectly styled hair, replaced by a simple polo shirt from Target and sneakers that showed actual signs of wear. More importantly, the arrogant confidence that had once defined his every interaction had been replaced by something quieter and more genuine. The application asks for previous work experience, Tyler said, his pen hovering uncertainly over the form. Should I put down volunteer work? Or would that look like I'm trying to pad my resume? What volunteer work have you done? I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. Tyler's face reddened slightly. Well, I haven't actually done any formal volunteer work, but I helped organize some school events. Events that were paid for by your trust fund and managed by professional coordinators while you served as the front person? He nodded reluctantly. Yeah, basically. Then leave that section blank and be honest about your situation. Employers respect honesty more than they respect creative resume writing. Tyler filled out the application with careful precision, occasionally asking questions about terminology or requirements that most 18-year-olds would have understood instinctively. Watching him struggle with basic employment concepts was both heartbreaking and necessary. For the first time in his life, Tyler was facing the same challenges that his peers had been navigating for years. The recreation center job paid $12 per hour for 20 hours per week, which would give Tyler approximately $960 per month before taxes. After federal and state deductions, he would take home roughly $720, which was less than he had previously spent on restaurants in a typical week. But Tyler had approached the application process with the kind of focused determination I remembered from his early childhood, when he would spend hours working on school projects until they met his own exacting standards. Grandma Ruth, he said, setting down his pen and looking at me directly for the first time since we had sat down. Can I ask you something? Of course. How much money do you actually have? It was the question I had been expecting for 2 weeks, ever since Tyler had begun researching financial concepts and slowly piecing together the implications of my control over his trust fund. Why do you want to know? Because I've been trying to figure out how you could afford to give me $2,500 a month if you were actually poor. And then I started thinking about the compass you gave me, and how you knew so much about businesses in town and how you always seemed to understand financial stuff that I never paid attention to. I sipped my coffee while Tyler waited for an answer. Around us, Henderson's diner buzzed with the quiet conversation of working people grabbing lunch between shifts, retired couples sharing afternoon coffee, and teenagers doing homework at corner booths. It was the kind of place Tyler had never noticed during his years of dining at upscale establishments, but where he now felt comfortable enough to have serious conversations. Tyler, I said finally, what would you guess? He thought for a long moment, his brow furrowed in concentration. At first I thought maybe you had like $50,000 saved up from working, and you were spending it all on me. But that doesn't make sense, because you've been paying my allowance for 3 years, plus school stuff, and car insurance, and everything else. Keep going. So then I thought maybe you had a few $100,000, like from selling a house or something. But even that wouldn't last very long with how much I was spending. He paused, clearly working through calculations in his head. The only way the math works is if you have a lot more money than I thought. Like, a lot more. How much more? Tyler's voice dropped to almost a whisper. Millions? I nodded slowly. Several millions, actually. The impact of this confirmation was visible on Tyler's face as he processed the full scope of his misunderstanding. But you live in that little house, and you drive that old car, and you shop with coupons. Because I choose to, Tyler. Wealth isn't about spending money to impress people. It's about having the freedom to make choices based on your values, rather than your limitations. Tyler stared at his hands for a long moment. I called you homeless. Yes, you did. I told you that you dressed wrong and embarrassed me. That's correct. And the whole time you were paying for everything in my life. Everything, Tyler. Your allowance, your car insurance, your private school tuition, your meal plans, even the birthday party where you insulted me. Every dollar you spent came from my investments and properties. Tyler's eyes filled with tears. Why didn't you tell me? Because I wanted you to develop values that weren't based on money. I wanted you to learn to appreciate people for who they were, not what they could provide for you. I wanted you to understand the difference between earning respect and buying it. I failed completely, didn't I? You failed the first test, I said gently. But you're passing the second one. Over the next hour, I explained to Tyler the full scope of my financial holdings and how I had built them over 4 decades of careful investing and business development. I told him about the rental properties that generated steady income, the small businesses I owned throughout Connecticut, and the investment portfolio that had grown through compound interest and reinvestment rather than flashy speculation. More importantly, I explained my philosophy about money and values. Wealth is a tool, Tyler. It can provide security, opportunity, and freedom, but it can also insulate you from reality, corrupt your relationships, and make you dependent on things that don't actually matter. Is that what happened to me? He asked. You became addicted to a lifestyle that required constant financial support, but you never acknowledged where that support came from. You surrounded yourself with people who valued you for your spending power rather than your character. You developed expensive tastes without developing the skills or work ethic needed to sustain them. Tyler absorbed this criticism without defensiveness, which represented a dramatic change from his previous responses to any form of correction. What happens now? That depends on you. You can complete the requirements I outlined, demonstrate that you've learned to value money and respect the people who support you, and gradually earn back some of your previous privileges. Or you can decide that you prefer the independence and authenticity that comes with supporting yourself. What would you do? I'd take the job at the recreation center, work hard enough to earn a promotion within 6 months, and use the experience to develop skills and work habits that would serve me for the rest of my life. I'd live modestly while I built a foundation for long-term success. And I'd make sure that everyone who helped me along the way knew how grateful I was for their support. Tyler nodded slowly. Even if it meant giving up the expensive restaurants and designer clothes and weekend trips? Tyler, you're 18 years old. You have 60 or 70 years ahead of you to earn money and build the life you want. But you only have a few years left to develop the character and work ethic that will determine what kind of life that actually becomes. 3 months later, Tyler was promoted to assistant coordinator at the recreation center after demonstrating exceptional reliability and initiative in his work with youth sports programs. He had moved out of Sarah's expensive house in Riverside Heights and into a small apartment near downtown Millfield that he shared with 2 roommates from the community college. His monthly expenses had dropped to approximately $800, which left him with modest savings from his $1,200 monthly income. More significantly, Tyler had begun volunteering at the community center's financial literacy program, helping other young adults learn budgeting and investment basics. He had completed an online course in personal finance and was planning to pursue a business degree at the state university, where he had qualified for partial scholarships based on both academic merit and financial need. Tyler's social circle had transformed completely. His friends from Riverside Prep had gradually faded from his life as their interests diverged, and their economic circumstances became incompatible. Instead, Tyler had developed relationships with coworkers, classmates, and community members who valued effort, integrity, and authentic friendship over financial capacity. On a Saturday afternoon in late spring, Tyler knocked on my door carrying a small wrapped package. He looked healthy, confident, and genuinely happy in a way that his previous artificial abundance had never achieved. When I opened the door, he held out the package with a shy smile. "I have something for you," he said. Inside the wrapping was a small wooden picture frame containing a photograph of Tyler at his graduation from the Recreation Center's Youth Coordinator Training Program. He was wearing a simple shirt and tie, holding a certificate and surrounded by children from the summer sports program he had helped organize. His smile in the photo was authentic and unguarded. "I wanted you to have this," Tyler said, "because you taught me that the best pictures aren't the ones where you look perfect. They're the ones where you've earned the right to be proud of yourself." I hung the photograph on my kitchen wall, right next to the compass I had given Tyler for his birthday 6 months earlier. He had returned it to me with a note explaining that he wasn't ready to own something so valuable, but that he hoped to earn it back someday through his actions rather than his expectations. "Tyler," I said as we sat in my kitchen sharing coffee and homemade cookies, "do you understand now why I made those changes to your allowance?" "You weren't punishing me for being rude," he said. You were saving me from becoming someone I wouldn't be able to live with. And what did you learn about money? Tyler thought for a moment before answering. I learned that money is earned through work, saved through discipline, and shared through love. I learned that people who have money don't always show it, and people who show money don't always have it. And I learned that the most expensive thing you can buy is respect, but the only way to actually get it is to give it away first. I smiled and squeezed his hand. Now you're ready to inherit something truly valuable. My trust fund. No, Tyler, your integrity. Everything else is just details. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.